Our next system that we will be covering is the digestive system. So here you can see basically all of the parts, for the most part, of the digestive system, all the organs. So we're going to talk about the functions of all of these and how they work together. The way that your digestive system is organized is into two main groups. So there are a lot of organs that make up the digestive system, but we can put them into one of two groups. And the first group is called the alimentary canal, or it's also called the GI tract or gastrointestinal tract. That's basically a tube that extends from your mouth to the anus, where the food passes directly through those organs that make up the alimentary canal. And then we also have accessory organs, which that's going to be things that will help the digestive process, but are not part of that main tube that we'll call it, that make up your GI tract. So that's going to be things like your teeth, your tongue, salivary glands, the liver and gallbladder, the pancreas, which is behind the stomach right there. And again, we'll talk about all of those. So if we start first with the gastrointestinal tract or GI tract, again, that extends from the mouth to the anus, and it's about 30 feet in length. So that is a lot of space to be fitting inside of you, and the way that it fits inside of you is basically by being folded up. It's going to be made up of the oral cavity, which is your mouth, your pharynx, which is your throat, the esophagus, which is the tube that food travels through to get to your stomach. Then we would have the stomach, small and large intestines, rectum, and anal canal. So all of those in that order make up the GI tract, and food would pass through all of those parts as it's being digested. For the accessory organs, their job is to basically just assist or help organs of the GI tract with their functions. So again, it's going to include your teeth, tongue, and salivary glands, all of which are in your mouth, as well as your liver and gallbladder that you can see here, and the pancreas. Okay. If we look at the process of digestion, the food that we eat, that you put into your mouth, chew, and swallow, we can't use that food in the form that we physically put it into our mouth. So our digestive system lets us turn our food into a form that our cells can actually use. And there's several different stages to that happening. First, you would have mechanical digestion, where you physically break the food into smaller pieces. One example of that would be you chewing your food. We also need to chemically reduce our food, so we need to break the chemical bonds that hold the molecules in the food that we're eating together, so that we can rearrange them and put them into forms that we can actually use. So we're going to have different enzymes that let us chemically reduce our food. We also need to absorb your food into the bloodstream so it can get to all of your cells, and it's going to cross the walls of your intestines to be able to do that. And then it's going to be carried by your blood to the cells of your body so they can actually use the molecules that are in the food you're eating. If we look at those digestive processes, first you have ingestion. So you taking food, picking it up with your hand, a fork, spoon, whatever, and putting it into your mouth. That is mechanical digestion, because you are physically putting that food into your mouth. Next, we have mastication, which is going to involve both mechanical and chemical digestion. Mastication is the process of chewing your food. When you are chewing your food, your salivary glands release saliva, or your spit, and that has enzymes in it. They're going to start the process of chemical digestion. Once you've chewed your food, you need to then swallow your food, and that process is called deglutition. So you physically swallowing your food, again, that would fall under mechanical digestion. Next is something called peristalsis. Peristalsis is going to be a process done by smooth muscle, which we've just talked about, muscle before winter break. And peristalsis is basically wave-like muscle contractions that move through your gastrointestinal tract to help push food through your digestive system. And because it's physically moving the food, that would be mechanical digestion. For absorption, that will fall under both mechanical and chemical digestion. So the molecules in your food need to go from your GI tract into your blood, in your circulatory system. So it needs to physically move as well as chemically become smaller to be able to go into your bloodstream. And then finally, you have defecation, which is mechanical. It is physically getting rid of undigestible waste. You better know it as pooping. Now, if we take a look at your digestive organs, we're going to go in order, starting with your mouth. So the function for digestion of your mouth is mastication, or the process of chewing. So you're going to, when you're chewing, you're going to moisten the food with saliva, and that starts the process of chemical digestion. There are associated, accessory organs that are associated with your mouth, and we mentioned those earlier. So that's going to include the tongue, teeth, and salivary glands. The space between your tongue and the palate, or the roof of your mouth, is called the oral cavity. And there's two parts to the palate, or the roof of your mouth. You have the hard palate and the soft palate. The hard palate is closer to the front of your mouth. So if you were to take your tongue and press it to the roof of your mouth right behind your teeth, you can feel that it's hard there, and that's part of your hard palate. Behind that is the muscular part that's going to border, or cause, or create the border between your mouth, or your oral cavity, and your pharynx, which is your throat, and that is called the soft palate. Your tongue contains papillae, which are your taste buds, and it also helps to move food around your mouth and helps to push it to the back of your mouth for you to be able to swallow your food. Your teeth are going to provide mastication, so they allow you to physically chew your food. We have two different sets of teeth during normal development. The first set starts to appear around the age of 6 months, and they continue to erupt through the gums until all 20 teeth are present by around 2 years of age. These are referred to as deciduous teeth because we lose them. So most of the kind of trees around where we live are called deciduous trees because they lose their leaves in the fall. And that's where this term comes from your teeth, because we lose all of those teeth. The second set of teeth appears starting around age 6 and up until around 12 years of age. But by the end of adolescence, or the end of your teen years, all of your permanent teeth have erupted except for your third molars or your wisdom teeth. And they tend to appear between age 17 and 25, might be earlier for some people. Those are teeth that people typically have to have taken out because they press on your other teeth and cause issues. In a full set of teeth, you have 32 permanent teeth. And then the structure of a tooth, if you see here, we have the crown. So if you were to smile in a picture and we saw your teeth, the part of your teeth that we're seeing is the crown. It's the part above the gum line. The root is down here. It's buried below your gum line. And enamel is what covers the surface of your tooth. And it's actually the hardest substance in our body. So while it is possible to chip your teeth, it is very difficult to do that because, again, enamel is the hardest substance in our body. The other structure we have, accessory organs that we have with your mouth, are salivary glands. You have a variety of these located around the mouth. You can see you have your sublingual, which is below your tongue, submandibular, which is like below your jaw, and then the parotid, which would be kind of up in your cheek, below your ear. And they're all going to secrete a substance called saliva, which is a clear fluid. It's got enzymes in it that allows the process of chemical digestion to begin. We're going to look next at the overall process of digestion while we're still talking about the mouth, and then we'll move through the other digestive organs as well. So digestion in your mouth, that's going to be where digestion actually starts. And it's going to start with, again, the process of mastication, or chewing your food. When you are chewing your food and it's becoming mixed with saliva, it's then known as what we call a bolus. So when you are swallowing your food that you've chewed up and it's been mixed with saliva, what you're swallowing is called a bolus. You can see they're showing it in green in this diagram. When you are swallowing your food, we have an important structure. It is small. You can see it here, but it is important, and it's called the epiglottis. It's kind of have kind of a leaf shape to it. It's basically a flap of cartilage located behind your tongue. So the tongue would be here and the epiglottis is down here. It's right above your larynx, which is your voice box. And what its purpose is so that it will cover your windpipe or your trachea while you're swallowing your food, so you don't accidentally get food into your trachea or your windpipe. So when you're swallowing your food, this epiglottis would move down to cover the trachea, and that allows food to go back down the esophagus. The esophagus is right behind your trachea. If you've ever swallowed something you were eating or drinking and you start to choke and you say it, quote, like went down the wrong tube, people say that sometimes, and what they really mean is that you swallowed kind of too quickly for the epiglottis to cover the trachea, and that food or drink goes into your trachea instead, or your windpipe instead. So then you start coughing to try to get that out so it hopefully doesn't go into your lungs and cause other issues. Next, we have your pharynx, which again is your throat. It's located behind the oral cavity or the mouth, and it's basically where its job is to get food from the mouth to the esophagus. And it's going to be where deglutition or swallowing occurs. So that would happen in your pharynx or your throat. Next, we have the esophagus, and that's basically just a tube of muscle that extends from the pharynx or the throat to the stomach. And it's typically about 10 inches in length. It's located behind the trachea. It's typically flat, like a flat tube, unless there is food moving through it. And it's also at the bottom of it going to form what we call the lower esophageal sphincter or the cardiac sphincter, where it joins the stomach. That acts like a valve, so it's going to let food go from the esophagus into the stomach. And it's also supposed to prevent stomach contents from coming back up into the esophagus. So if someone were to throw up, that lower esophageal sphincter, which is a muscle, like a muscular valve, it would open and allow those stomach contents to come out of the stomach and back up into the esophagus. Next, we have the stomach. So food would move into the stomach from the esophagus, and it's basically just a pouch-like organ. It is able to hold over 2 liters of food. It would stretch out to do that. But when there's no food in there and when it's empty, the inner lining is going to have deep folds, which you can see in this picture, and those are called rugae. That's going to allow the stomach to stretch out when it has food in it, but allow it to be smaller inside the body and not take up as much room when the stomach's empty. The lining of the stomach is called the mucosa. It's basically a layer of mucus and glands that line the inside of the stomach, and that is going to release about 2 to 3 liters of gastric juices per day. That's going to include enzymes and acid to help break down our food in our stomach. Once food has reached your stomach and it has been chewed, mixed with saliva in your mouth and swallowed, and that's again a bolus. Once it reaches your stomach and becomes mixed with your gastric juices, then it is referred to as chyme. And then at that point, once food is done in your stomach, and we're not going to be done talking about the stomach just yet, but it would move through another sphincter. So there was a sphincter or a muscular valve at the beginning of the stomach and at the end of the stomach. That is the pyloric sphincter, and that's going to open to allow food to go into the next organ, which is the small intestine. And we'll get to that shortly. There are different parts to your stomach. The small area that surrounds the opening from the esophagus where food actually enters your stomach is called the cardia. And as I mentioned before, it's the valve that's there is the sphincter, which would be sometimes referred to as the cardiac sphincter or lower esophageal sphincter. Next, we have the fundus, which is this bulging up part here. It's going to be just a temporary holding area for food until it moves into the body of the stomach or the main part of the stomach. The end of the stomach here where it starts to narrow is called the pylorus. And at the end of it, we have the pyloric sphincter, which again is going to allow food to pass when it's ready into the duodenum of the small intestine which is the next part of the GI tract. If we look at digestion that happens in the stomach, it's going to be both mechanical and chemical. Mechanical digestion is going to be when the stomach churns and physically breaks up food. So if you sometimes kind of feel like after you've eaten, you can sometimes feel your stomach moving a little bit. It's to help physically break up your food. And then the chemical digestion that happens is also going to release acid and enzymes to chemically break up that food. So our stomach does produce hydrochloric acid. So the pH in our stomach is fairly low. It should be between like a 1 and a 3 pH, if you remember talking about that a little bit in biology and more in chemistry. So both mechanical and chemical digestion happen in our stomachs. Next, we're going to take a look at a few more accessory organs. So we have the pancreas. It's located right behind the stomach. So if we were looking, we wouldn't really see too much of this because the stomach would be right here covering that up. For the pancreas, it does have a few functions, or a couple functions, I should say. It will produce some hormones that we need, but we won't talk about those now. What we will talk about is the enzymes. So your pancreas produces digestive enzymes and creates a mixture with fluid that we call pancreatic juice that is going to get released into the first part of the small intestine right here. It's going to help to digest and absorb carbohydrates. Next, we have the liver. The liver is our largest visceral organ of the body, or the largest internal organ of our body. It's going to occupy the upper right side. So again, if you think of anatomical position, you're looking at someone else's right and left. So when you're looking at this picture, it looks like it's on the left, but it would be on the person's right. It's going to rest above or right below the diaphragm. The diaphragm would be right above the liver, which we haven't talked about the diaphragm yet too much, but it is going to be a muscle that helps with breathing. So right above here would be the diaphragm, and then the liver kind of presses up against that. It is divided into two main sections. You can see those here, the right lobe, which is larger, and then the left lobe. The primary function as far as digestion for the liver is to produce something called bile. Bile is like a yellowish green fluid that helps you to digest and absorb fat in the food that we're eating. You can also see here the gallbladder, which is associated with the liver. Its function is to basically store and concentrate bile that the liver produces. You can live without your gallbladder. Doctors are able to remove it, and you're able to live just fine. The liver just needs to work to concentrate the bile then, instead of it happening in the gallbladder. If and when we are able to do the fetal pig dissection, you will be able to see this. It does look green inside the body from the bile that it would store. And I will tell you not to cut open the gallbladder because it does smell really bad, the bile inside of it. That would be something I would definitely remind you of again before we got to that point. Next, we have the small intestine. So the small intestine is actually your body's most important digestive organ. Most people, until they've learned about the digestive system, usually think the stomach is the most important, but it's not. It's actually the small intestine. And that's because most of the absorption for the digestive process happens in our small intestine. It's about 20 feet in length, and it's going to extend from the stomach and kind of be all twisted up here until it joins the large intestine, which we see framing the small intestine. Now, the small intestine is actually longer than the large intestine, but the reason why it's called the small intestine is because of the diameter of your small intestine. It's only about 1 inch in diameter, where your large intestine is about 3 inches in diameter. So their name comes from the diameter of it rather than the length. Your small intestine has 3 segments to it. We have the duodenum, and I have the pronunciations here for you to hopefully help you be able to say them a little more easily. The duodenum receives chyme from the stomach through the pyloric sphincter, so that would happen right up here. Your stomach would be right up in this area. The next segment is called the jejunum, and that's about 8 feet in length out of the 20 overall feet. And then the third segment, the final segment, is called the ileum. This is a capital I here, which hopefully if you look at the pronunciation, you can remember that. It is actually the longest segment of the small intestine, about 12 feet in length. And it connects directly to the large intestine so that the chyme passing through it, the digested food, can move on into the large intestine. We look at functions of the small intestine since it is so important. Let me move that. There we go. So chemical digestion and absorption are going to happen in the small intestine. The process of chemical digestion is going to be completed in the small intestine by using a mixture of enzymes that have been produced by different parts of our digestive system, as well as using bile made in the liver and then stored in the gallbladder. Another function, again, is absorption, and again, that's what makes the small intestine the most important digestive organ. The small intestine is the main site of nutrient absorption through what we call villi, and that's what you see in this picture right here. The villi are kind of like finger-like projections that stick into the opening of the tube of the small intestine, and they're going to increase the surface area inside of the small intestine, so that it's going to make the small intestine much more efficient at absorbing the nutrients from the food the food that's passing through. You also are going to absorb lots of water and electrolytes through the villi. About out of every 3 liters of water, only 1 liter will pass into the large intestine. So your small intestine is also important at absorbing water. If there is infection that occurs, so if you, let's say, ate something bad that was contaminated with bacteria, the process of peristalsis would increase very rapidly to get the material that's passing through that food that would be contaminated out of your body, and that would result in diarrhea. So that's your body's way of getting rid of something that could potentially cause you harm with what you've eaten. Continuing with absorption, again, I'll repeat that here because it was a little hard to see on the other slide. Out of 3 liters of water, again, only 1 passes through to the large intestine. And then with the next and the final function of the small intestine, we have something called propulsion. Chyme is going to be propelled through the small intestine through what we call segmentation. That's going to include peristalsis, so muscle contractions that mix and move food. And I'm going to show you a video quickly, if I can bring that up. Here we go. Okay, so you'll be able to see this kind of happening here.
Distinct muscular actions of the GI tract move food on its long journey. Wave-like rhythmic muscular contractions push food and digestive materials in one direction along the GI tract. These muscle contractions are called peristalsis. Segmentation is a muscular movement that occurs in the small intestine. The alternating forward and backward movements of segmentation further mix the partially digested food and digestive juices and bring this mixture, called chyme, into contact with the intestinal wall.
Okay, so the fact that it's bringing the chyme into contact with the intestinal wall, that's going to be what allows the nutrients to be absorbed through the villi and make that more efficient. Finally, we have the large intestine. It's about 5 feet in length, and it's going to extend from the small intestine, which would join it right here, to the anus at the very end, which would be how your waste would leave your body. The main function of the large intestine is to form solid waste by drying out, so absorbing water from the material that's left that you're unable to digest from the food that you've eaten, and then to help get rid of that waste. I did skip over this, but I mentioned it a little bit before. The diameter of the large intestine is what gives it its name. It has a 3-inch diameter compared to the small intestine, which has about a 1-inch diameter. There are 4 main segments to the large intestine. First, you have the cecum, which is right here. The appendix, so sometimes you hear people have issues with their appendix. that would kind of hang down from the cecum, the first part of the large intestine. Then you would have the colon. There are 4 parts to the actual colon. So food would enter from your small intestine. Your small intestine would be in this area right here. Then it would enter into the cecum. It would go through the ascending colon, across through the transverse colon, down through the descending colon, and then down here where it's kind of a curved shape, kind of like an S, which is how I remember it, is the sigmoid colon. Then you would have the rectum, which is about an 8-inch chamber. It's going to store your stool until it can be gotten rid of. And then you would have the anal canal and the anus, which you would have another sphincter there, a ring-like muscular valve, that would then relax and release the contents in a process called defecation, which again we refer to usually as poop or pooping. So that would be the end of the GI tract. The last thing we're going to look at really quick are just some of the enzymes, because we've mentioned them throughout the lesson, but here you'll be able to see them. Okay, so we have in our food, you have 4 major macromolecules, which you hopefully remember from biology. You would have carbs, proteins, nucleic acids, and lipids or fat. We will be doing eventually kind of a project where you're going to come up with a diet plan, I'll say, for a particular patient that you're assigned. So we will be looking at some of these things again. But when you're looking at calories and the nutrients from what you're eating, typically you look at carbs, proteins, and fats. So carbs, you're going to have, like we mentioned before, so the digestion starts in your mouth. So you're going to have salivary amylase being released by your salivary glands. The pancreas will produce some, as well as the small intestine. Proteins, you're going to have digestion happening in the stomach and the small intestine. Nucleic acids, because you do need to break down the nucleic acids in your food as well. Those enzymes are produced by your pancreas and then released into the small intestine. And then fat digestion will be lipase from the pancreas. That digestion will happen in the small intestine as well. If you have questions about the digestive system, you want to go over anything again, you can just reach out and let me know. And just make sure you submit your notes for me when you are finished.